Hello, everyone. My name is Julian, and what I'm about to tell you now still gives me goosebumps. Many years have passed, but that night is still etched in my mind as if it had happened yesterday. I was 21 years old and lived with my parents on an isolated farm. It was a peaceful life, until one night everything changed. I was coming back from a party in the city. It was already dawn. The road that led to our farm was an old acquaintance, so even in the dark, I drove with a certain amount of peace. I was a few kilometers from home when something in the cornfield at the side of the road caught my attention. There was someone there, standing among the corn cobs. I slowed down and shouted to ask if everything was okay, but I got no answer. The person was still there, motionless, staring at the cornfield. I shouted once more, but the silence persisted. It was then that I made the mistake of threatening to call the police if I didn't leave. Even so, there was no reaction. I was getting impatient and scared. I decided to get out of the car, picked up a rock from the ground, and threw it at the figure. The rock hit it, but instead of running away, it slowly turned toward me. What I saw next didn't look human. It was thin, with a body that resembled that of a person, but something was very wrong. Its skin looked like an ill-fitting mask of human skin, as if it had been grotesquely sewn together. Its eyes, they weren't those of a living person. That look froze me in place for a moment. Without thinking twice, I ran back to the car, started the engine, and sped toward the farm. When I got home, still shaking, I told my father everything. He looked at me like I was crazy and suggested that maybe it was just a scarecrow that someone had placed in the cornfield to play a prank on passers-by. I was outraged, because I knew it wasn't a scarecrow. We didn't call the police that night, but I could barely sleep. The image of that thing haunted me every time I closed my eyes. The next day, I called some friends to go to the place. We searched for hours, but we didn't find anything. We decided to go to the city to clear our heads, and for a while, I even managed to forget about what had happened. However, when night fell, the fear came back with full force. On the way home, I passed through the same stretch, but this time I didn't dare look at the cornfield. My only goal was to get home as quickly as possible. A few meters ahead, however, the car started to lose power. I got out to see what had happened and realized that one of the tires was flat. When I looked closely, I saw a rusty nail stuck in it. At that moment, my heart started racing. It seemed obvious to me that this was not an accident. In desperation, I called my father. He said he would be there in 10 minutes, but while I was waiting, I heard something that froze me with fear, laughter coming from the cornfield. Childish laughter, but distorted, as if something was imitating the sound of a child. Soon after, there were quick footsteps, as if someone were running between the rows of corn. Suddenly, a voice whispered near the car, "Let's play in the cornfield." I locked all the car doors and tried to remain calm. The street lights were dim, but they were bright enough for me to see if anything was approaching. My father arrived a few minutes later, and the laughter stopped immediately. I told him everything and we decided to wait for the police. They arrived shortly after, but all they found was a rusty knife stuck in the cornfield. Nothing else. After that, I spent months without leaving the house at night. To this day, when night falls, I avoid passing by that place. Whatever it was playing with me. And I know that, somehow, it is still there, waiting. Anonymous report. I used to live on a farm with my parents. I actually liked the place, fresh air, nature all around, a calm and peaceful environment. At least that's what it seemed like, until things started to change. It all started on an ordinary night, until it was interrupted by a deafening scream coming from the pig pen, where the pigs were kept. The sound was so loud and sudden that it woke up the whole house. My parents heard it too. My mother, frightened, tried to stop my father from going there. She said it was dangerous, that we didn't know who or what could be out there in the middle of the night. But, as always, my father insisted that it was better to check. I offered to go with him. We grabbed a flashlight and headed to the pig pen. The silence outside was heavy, suffocating. The pigs were clearly agitated, but to our amazement, there was nothing else. No sign of footprints, no tracks, absolutely nothing that would justify that scream. We returned home with my father's promise that the next morning he would take a closer look at everything. We were all certain that we had heard something, but the next day, even after a closer inspection, he found nothing unusual. We decided to let it go, thinking that perhaps it was just an isolated incident. The days passed, and everything seemed to be returning to normal. Until one morning, I was awakened by the sound of my parents talking in tense voices. I thought they were arguing, but when I asked what was going on, my father explained that he was trying to calm my mother down. She swore she had heard someone knocking slowly and repeatedly on the front door during the early hours of the morning. My father looked out the window, but there was no one outside. The situation became so serious that we called the police. When the police arrived, my father reported what had happened and mentioned the strange scream in the pigsty. They looked around the farm, but, like the other time, found absolutely nothing. They said that if anything like that happened again, we should call them immediately. Now, I'm going to tell you about the event that really terrified me. A few weeks later, nothing had happened and everything seemed calm. My parents decided to go to the city to meet some friends, but I preferred to stay home alone. It was already night, around 7, and I was preparing something to eat in the kitchen when I heard the sound of knocking on the front door. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor, even though I lived far away from everyone. I asked who was there, but there was no answer. The sound continued, slow and steady. I gathered up the courage and went to the window next to the door, which gave a clear view of who was in front of the house. When I looked, my blood ran cold. There was someone there, completely covered in black clothes, from head to toe. He was wearing a mask that resembled a monster, and I couldn't see his face. He was standing there, motionless, looking directly at the window where I was. It was at that moment that I felt my body freeze. We both stared at each other, as if time had stopped. I yelled that the police were on their way, but he didn't react. He didn't seem to care. Desperate, I turned away from the window and ran to call the police. A few minutes passed, the noise stopped, and the house fell into complete silence. I thought he had gone. When I went back to the window to check, I nearly had a heart attack. He was still there, standing there, staring at the window. What happened next left me in a panic. He slowly raised his hand, waved me goodbye with slow gestures, and started walking toward the woods. Before disappearing into the trees, he stopped and pointed his finger directly at me. The police arrived shortly after. I told them everything that had happened, and they suggested that I call my parents, something I forgot to do in my rush. My parents rushed home, and the police searched the area, even using dogs, but, as usual, they found no sign of that person. Since then, I have lived in fear. My father installed cameras around the farm, but they didn't bring me much peace. I don't know what this person wants, or why this is happening, but the feeling of being watched doesn't leave me. And honestly, I don't know if it ever will. Willian's story. My name is Willian, and what I'm about to tell you happened a few years ago. It was an experience that had a profound impact on me, something that I'm still trying to understand today. I had spent the day visiting a friend who lived on an isolated farm. On the way home, late at night, my car simply died in the middle of the road. The engine turned off as if something had sucked all the power out of it. At the time, I thought it was the battery, so I called my friend for help. He said he was on his way, and according to my calculations, it would take about 20 minutes to get there. While I waited, I decided to stay inside the car, with the doors locked, trying to rest. But it wasn't long before I started hearing strange noises outside, as if something, or someone, was walking around the car. It was too dark to see anything, and I knew it couldn't be my friend, since he was still on his way. I tried to convince myself that it was just local animals, probably curious about the parked car. I tried to relax, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. It was then that the sound changed. I clearly heard someone trying to open the back door of the car. The shock was so great that I almost jumped out of my seat. A chill ran down my spine, and at that moment I realized that it wasn't an animal. Whoever it was trying to get into the car. My heart raced. I screamed in despair, warning that I was armed and that my friend was on his way, and that this person should leave. But the silence that followed was worse than any answer. The only thing I could hear was my own labored breathing. A few minutes later, something hit the window next to me hard. It was as if someone had knocked, trying to get my attention. I grabbed my cell phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the area around me. Nothing. Total darkness swallowed me, and the noises continued around me, muffled, as if something was lurking in the shadows. Luckily, my friend arrived soon after, illuminating the road with his car's headlights. I felt immediate relief, but at the same time, butterflies in my stomach when I realized that something really strange was happening. I ran to him and explained what I had heard. He laughed, trying to relax, saying that it must have been an animal and that I was nervous for nothing. But in the next moment, the smile disappeared from his face. His gaze fixed on my car, and he yelled at me to get in his car, without hesitation. Not understanding, I got in his car, and before I could ask what was happening, he sped off and left as fast as he could. I asked him repeatedly what he had seen, but he was in shock. Finally, he said, "When I arrived, while you were talking to me, I saw someone inside your car, a person, with a completely disfigured face, and she was looking at me, smiling." My whole body froze. I didn't know what to say. He drove back to the farm, where we spent the rest of the night awake, trying to understand what had happened. We talked about ghosts, about things we couldn't explain, but honestly, no theory brought us peace. We decided that in the morning we would go back to get my car. The next morning, we got back on the road. The car was there, just as I had left it, apparently intact. There were no signs of a break-in, no suspicious marks. It was as if nothing had happened. I've never experienced anything like that again, but every time I think about that night, the fear returns. I sincerely hope that I never have to experience something like that again. And so we end another chilling story. Some stories make us question what really exists out there, in the dark, where our eyes cannot reach. Whether it's a mysterious presence or just our mind playing tricks, the fear of the unknown is something that always accompanies us. So, the next time you hear a strange noise at night, think twice before ignoring it. It could just be the wind, or it could be something more. If you liked the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel for more chilling stories. And if you've ever had a supernatural experience, share it with us in the comments. Who knows, maybe the next story to be told won't be yours. Until next time, and be careful of what's lurking.